Sir from 17 once again. This is my Uncharted 4 crushing difficulty video walkthrough. This is chapter 6, Once a Thief, and this is a really fantastic level. This is one of my favourite in the entire game because it has a great mixture of all the elements that make Uncharted really, really good. It begins outside. We're going to be doing a little bit more tutorial jumping, getting us into the swing of things, if you'll pardon the pun, and just getting to grips with how this new game plays. And there is a great mixture of platforming at the beginning with some narrative and some intrigue. Then there's going to be some traversal elements, a little bit of puzzle solving, and then penultimately there will be an action sequence that is followed either by another action sequence depending on if you want to stealth or not. And this first throw here is intentional to have the brothers do some banter, because you will never miss those when that icon appears. It does it 100% for dramatic effect to make Nate look a bit silly. Every other situation, the one thing you will be able to trust without flaw in this game is that grappling hook, and it's going to really, really help you in certain sequences later on. This particular platforming puzzle right now is a pretty strange one in the grand scheme of Uncharted, because we're unable to go forward of our own volition. We have to wait for Sam to do this next trigger, and at times it can be a little frustrating when you're trying to, get through the game. But it must be said, this game has some of the most interesting features I've ever seen in any game I've ever played. The first one is a cinematic mode, or like a cinematic battle mode or something like that. I don't know the specific name of it, I saw it in the review. You can pick a version of the game where it skips all this, I think. All it is the combat. It skips all the platforming, it skips all the puzzle solving, it skips all the cutscenes, all that kind of stuff. It just puts you into the sequences where you're controlling and you have to do things. And I think that sounds wonderful. I didn't use it for the purposes of this walkthrough because I didn't know which it excluded and which it didn't, but just the idea of having a stripped down version of your game for people to play who want a very specific thing is one of the most intelligent things I've seen a dev do. And I've not seen it before personally, but I'm sure it exists elsewhere, and I think it's something great that should be imitated. And the game is full of such moments like that, which I think is very admirable considering they've built all this amazing bullshit. Normally, they would want you to see it, and I'm sure they're hoping that you do. Why would they have modelled it? Why would they have put so much love and attention into it if you were just going to skip it all? Which brings us to loading, because loading was a fear of mine when I first saw some of those horrendous load times, and I can pretty smoothly say that you don't have to worry at all about loading in this game. The only time it takes a big time to load is if you're skipping cutscenes, and when you're playing Uncharted, there's only a slight percentage of people who are skipping cutscenes. Those are the people who are replaying it for the umpth time, or the people who are perhaps doing challenge runs or some kind of crushing run, something like that, and they want to get directly into the gameplay. Everybody else is enjoying the cutscenes, and they don't notice that they're masking loads, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're hiding load times from you. So if you skip them, you don't have that luxury, and that's when the load times become kind of ridiculous. And they do this funny thing of, it'll go from 0 to 99% at a pretty rapid click, and then the 1% to 100 and play the game is longer than it took to get to 99%. And I always find it to be kind of strange when they use that kind of numeration, because what's the point? If it was going to take that long to go from 99 to 100, why did they even count it? Because all you're doing here is making me realise that 99 of these ticks was perfect and the last one is a bastard. It's just this really strange setup, and loading from a death is very quick. It's so quick it makes editing this walkthrough a little bit more challenging, which is a massive compliment to the game because it puts you back in the action that quick. It's kind of amazing actually how fast you're able to continue. I would go as far as to say it's just a little bit under the high definition collection, which if you've played those games, you are back in that action immediately. It's the ultimate checkpoint. It's the ultimate click back in. And I love that because there's nothing worse in any game than when you're on a challenging moment and you're spending more time cursing the loading or cursing the time it takes to get back into game than you are overcoming the difficult part. And I do think that loading can add challenge to areas that seemingly beforehand would not have had it, just by the way it affects you mentally and it affects you psychologically. And it does have an effect, you know, you don't think it does at the time, but it really does in the way that you play. And that's one of the reasons why removing checkpoints is one of those just really strange choices for me, because it makes something that isn't challenging artificially awkward, and it gives it challenge it doesn't necessarily deserve. And I'm not a big fan of unearned challenge. I like challenge to be a very specific thing. And to me it seems simple. Right? Making a game hard is easy. It's the easiest thing in the world. Making AI bastards is easy to do. Anybody can do it. It's very simple. Making AI that's fair is very difficult, and that's the challenge here. Anybody can make AI shoot perfectly. Anybody can make AI throw perfect grenades. Anybody can make it so that you take so much damage you cannot survive. These are not difficult things to do. They're sliders, and you just put them up. You put them up to a level where there's no real answer to it. That's not difficulty though, that's just shit. That's just bad design. And there's a big difference. And in a lot of ways, difficulty is more about where it fails than where it succeeds. Because infallibility is boring and nobody wants that. Fallibility is so difficult to achieve. And there are moments in this game where you're going to be clinging onto a ledge for dear life because there's no other cover anywhere else that's going to help you. And they're going to throw grenades at you, and you're going to duck the grenade, move away from it, go back, and then another grenade's going to be there. And by the time it gets to about the 6th or 7th grenade in a row, you're going to start to realise that it's not good. And it could have been made way better if they'd have enabled us to chuck them back. And then you realise that you could do that in the older games, which makes it even more frustrating. Oh, by the way, for this lift here, if you mash triangle while looking at it with the analog, you can get it on the second attempt. You might even be able to get it on the first if you're quick enough, but I didn't quite realise what we were doing because I was not paying too much attention. But there's the key anyhow. We can continue onwards in our little heist here. Fantastic level. Really, really do like the chemistry that they've got going in this one. But as I was saying, when those grenades are coming at you, and they will, guys, you're going to get into some spots where the grenades are going to make your life a misery. You're going to realise that the reason you can't throw them back is because of how good they would be. Grenades in this game are fantastic. The only problem with them is the reticle to throw them at times is so pointless and worthless that it's very difficult to make precise distance throws with them, because you just can't decipher what the picture's meant to mean. It's very confusing at times. And you're going to see it in the Scotland level when I'm chucking grenades and they're not really doing anything because I can't fucking see. And it's not like I can get out of cover, stand on my tiptoes and get a nice view of my vision cone because I'll die. So I have to chuck it from cover, and then I can't fucking see a thing except for a bunch of different weird highlighted areas that don't mean much because you can't decipher them because they don't actually read as anything. And it means that you miss a lot of grenades you probably should have thrown better. And you can learn it like everything else. You'll be able to learn the tells and the ways to do it correctly. But in the heat of battle, it can be very difficult to do. If you were able to throw grenades back, just because of the sheer frequency of how many grenades the enemy throws at you, you would alleviate some of those areas, and you'd make them very simple. Because the two areas that stand out to me as the bits that are going to be like, Jesus, people are going to need help here, are both areas that if you could sit and chuck grenades back from the ledge, you'd never get touched. Because the grenades do an interesting thing, you see. They force you to move. That's how they're designed to be. But this is a game where it rarely gives you cover that's worth using. So having a feature where the cover just isn't there, and then having a feature that pushes you out of the cover that wasn't there, it culminates in these really weird moments of grenades are going to find you, and a lot of the times it's going to be in a spot where you're just kind of like, this is weird. And it leads to these bizarre moments. And the only time I can really think of where the grenades were 100% assholes is on Chapter 20, which has the hardest firefight in the entire game, for the wrong reasons. And that reason, if you don't know, guys, is because they've removed a checkpoint. And it's a gauntlet. It's a gauntlet of enemies, and it's a gauntlet of not having enough ammunition to deal with the enemies, and it's a gauntlet of the enemies having the better position on you in every single position. Because every piece of cover is destructible, and you just cannot put yourself in a spot where you have any kind of advantage. And then when it's at its worst, and it feels like all hell is already found you, and there is no bright skies ahead, it gets worse. And where the checkpoint was in the previous versions, it's now gone. And you have to fight the worst assortment of enemies from a design perspective, because it's fucking evil. Not only is it a bunch of normal guys who can easily kill you, it's a guy with a grenade launcher who can easily kill you, backed up by 2 of the gas-masked grabby wankers who love to come and give you the jazz hands, backed up by 2 heavy minigun-wielding dudes. Like, it's everything they could have thought of at that moment to make it worse. It happens. And in any other situation, it would be fine. But in that situation, it makes something absolutely ridiculous. And I found it really funny because I was looking on YouTube to see if anybody beat it yet. And, of course, people will have beat it because that's just the nature of the game. But did they capture it, and is it on YouTube? And how did they do it, kind of deal? So I'm looking for crushing walkthroughs when I'm struggling on this sequence. And I find a guy who's done crushing up to the final boss. And it says, you know, chapter whatever it is, final boss, crushing. I'm like, wow, this guy's already beat it. Awesome. So I click on his playlist and I look back through. And every single mission is crushing, except for chapter 20. Chapter 20 is on hard. And it was just that moment of realising, like, this dude's beat the entire game on crushing, except for this one fucking chapter that I can't do. And then I watched his video of him on hard, and it was pointless because it's a completely different fight on hard. But he died. He died to the heavies. I'm like, oh wow. So it's, you know, you can still get romped if you're not careful. And then he spawns in as the heavies spawn, and that's when you realise that they have balanced that level perfectly. But then when you play it on crushing, they take away that balance, and it becomes its own thing. As we do some platforming here with our good old brother.
Hey, check this out.
And that's that moment when you realise that the majority of people that beat this on crushing are going to cheat. Because the game gives them no reason to try, you know? And I find that to be very sad, but it's true. Like, and I don't blame them for it. I really don't. This game is at its most difficult, not when it has anything to do with that third-person cover technique that I mentioned on the first video. It's sad to see that go, because it's a staple of third-person shooters, and it's really enjoyable and useful to do. But that's not what makes this game difficult. And in the areas where we're going to be having our worst nightmares realised, it has nothing to do with that. It's more to do with the cover is all destructible, and that's when they give you cover, which they often don't. And the fact that you will never have enough ammunition to fight what's trying to kill you. And it'll put you into spots where you have to take risks to survive. And these risks are coin tosses. And some of the strategies I'm going to be using on some of the hardest parts of this game have moments in them where I literally flick a coin in the air, clench my asshole, hold my breath, shut my eyes and pray. And that to me is not a strategy. That's not a walkthrough. And it makes me really angry that that's the way it has to be, because it's literally relying on a single bullet to win. It's making every shot count and not dying when you're trying to get those extra shots to finish the fight. And there's no strategy for that, guys. There's no clear-cut way of doing it. And you might be thinking, well, Chris, why don't you stealth it? And for most situations, the game alludes that you can stealth them. I don't think you can personally, and this is not in the same way that I said this in my Uncharted 3 walkthrough all those years ago, where I was like, there's a way to stealth this, but I just fucked up, so I shot people and I won in the end. No, this game is different when it comes to its stealth, and I just don't get it. It gives you, and every single encounter is the same. You'll come into a sequence where it's quite open-worldy in its impression of the battlefield. There'll be at least 30 enemies dotted around, because there's never 2, there's never 5, it's always 20. Every single time it's always fucking loads. And then you look, or you'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes scouting out where everybody is, where the tall grass is, if anybody's got a path that's going to come towards you where you can segregate them and take them out, get them all separated. And then you'll come to realise, if you try for a little bit longer than most will, that there's just no patterns at all. It's just random. People will go in general areas and then they'll go somewhere else, and everybody can see everybody else, so there's no real way to do it in a stealth-orientated manner. And I'm hoping that this is 100% ignorance of, I haven't figured out how to do it, but in every stealth section where I've come close to doing it, I've always failed the same way, because there's just too much all the time, and it's a stealth mechanic that just doesn't work as well as it could have. And that's coming from the other Uncharteds where the stealth wasn't great in those, but you could find these paths, and then when you pressed restart checkpoint, they were the same paths. So once you had it, you could do it every time, and I could share it with you, and you could have an easier time than I did. But this game doesn't work like that. Like, Scotland's a great example. It's the first area where they give you this freedom to approach it in that manner. And there's a sequence where you come out of a crypt, and then you're trying to get to a door. And the door is on this elevated area, and there's about 15 dudes dotted around this area in all different kinds of heights. I've got to the door, or to the area where the door is, about 5 or 6 times without being spotted, got super close to it, but there just doesn't seem to be any way, any path, any hole in the way they've assorted these enemies to do it without conflict. And I tried for about 40 minutes. It's not like I tried 2 attempts and then I fucked it off, even though I wanted to, because I think the stealth in this game's horrible, I really do. And if you want a great example of horrible stealth, Chapter 13. The worst chapter in the game. I absolutely fucking hate it. It's irredeemably bad. And it's been bad for a long time, because it's one of the things they showed. It was one of the first areas of the game they showed at, I think it was TGS in 2014 or 2015. And it was one of my least favourite sections in the game, because it's a massive stealth sequence that doesn't work against an army of enemies that are assholes with no checkpoint. It's really, really tricky. But it isn't fun. And I think that's the thing that sticks with me the most. We've just turned the lights out anyhow, guys. We've finished being a thief, and now we get to do a stealth section that's a little bit more redeemable, and then an action sequence that really introduces you to how this game's going to play in the future levels. But there's nothing too challenging just yet. You should be fine. You should be having pretty smooth sailing outside of the very beginning of the game. But thank you for watching, and you take care now.